It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We were scheduled to connect with Jim Van Stone, the COO of Monumental Sports Entertainment, and we found out the phone issues on our end. So, one, our apologies to Jim. Two, our apologies to you, as I was very much looking forward to that interview. However, we have been in touch with him in the break, and we are going to reschedule for tomorrow. So we will definitely have Jim Van Stone tomorrow on the show, and we will obviously let you guys know on Threads and on Twitter and everywhere else where you can listen to that interview. And if for whatever reason you're on your drive home now and we wind up having him at a different time in the show tomorrow and you're not normally on your commute home, you can always check it out on demand at Craig Hoffman on YouTube, on the Hoffman Show podcast, or using the rewind feature on the free Odyssey app. What this does do, though, is create space for what I think is the actual biggest topic here. And of course, within the realm of sports, the team moving and how we all react to that is the biggest factor. But realistically, sports matters a ton to a few of us. And the way a downtown is, the way life goes on in a city around sports and without sports even, matters a whole lot more to a lot more people. And even for as much as sports matters to all of us, things like education for our kids does matter more. If you could either have a great education for your child or a winning sports team, you'd pick the education for your child. You might joke about the sports team, but realistically, what's more important to you? The Wizards' success and them playing in a great arena and a place you want, or your ability to send your kid to a school and trust that they're going to get a good education and graduate, and above all that, be safe. And that is where I think Ted Leonsis taking his teams and leaving could actually be an opportunity for the district. Now, there would be a ton of lawyers. So I realize what I'm about to say is complicated. However, Leonsis has what's called a land lease on Capital One Arena. He owns the building. He leases the land. So theoretically, I don't know exactly how this would work. I need to talk. One of the people on my list to talk to that I didn't get to today is a real estate developer who would be able to talk me through how this works. Because they can't be like, hey, you're gone, and it's not the Monopoly board where they flick the house off and it goes flying across the room. Like, Capital One Arena is a lot of concrete and metal and stuff, and removing it would not be easy, but it can be done. And if I am Mayor Bowser, that is exactly what I would try to do. I know Ted wants to move the Mystics there, and that's a great thing that the Mystics have now garnered enough support that a 10,000 seat arena is more their speed than the 5,000 seats at ESA. Now, I've been on record saying I think ESA is awesome the way it's set up because it's packed out, and I hope that it continues to be that. And then hopefully if they move to Capital One Arena and there is more, there could be more. That also leads avoiding Congress Heights with the St. Elizabeth's location, and I do think that is important to mention as well. Leonsis just took public money with a promise to revitalize that area, which often means gentrify, and that also should be said here. And that has not happened at all. People go to the games, thousands of people go to the games, and then they go home. Nobody goes to dinner in Anacostia before a game. If anything, you might go somewhere in Navy Yard and then drive over. Or take the metro. But most people don't even take the metro because Anacostia is too far. The Anacostia station is too far to really walk. And, it doesn't feel like it's the safest part of town when you're making that walk over in Anacostia to ESA. So with all that said, we are looking at a city that is incredibly unique in a number of ways. But when it comes to housing and urban development, the building limits are so incredibly restrictive because of federal land, the federal government, and specifically the height limits. In Manhattan or Chicago, if you want to build more housing, You build up. You can't do that in DC. Buildings aren't allowed to be more than, 7 stories? Depending on how, maybe you can fit in an eighth, a ninth. But it can't be taller than the White House and the Washington Monument. The Capitol. The Capitol is the one that actually sets the bar. The only exception is the Washington Monument. So if that's the case, you can't just build a 40-story apartment building and be like, we created thousands of houses. Sweet. We just brought a couple thousand people into an area, and now we're going to build a fast casual this and a fast casual restaurant that, and a dry cleaner and a coffee shop and a gym or 6, which is what happens in these neighborhoods. And I think what needs to happen, and this is my top line, headline level phrase that I've been using on this since last night. The area around Capital One Arena is a business district that people no longer work in, and that is pandemic induced. Virtual and hybrid work is here to stay. It is something that the federal government realized that we don't need to, when we're trying to balance the budget, we don't need to pay all this money to real estate developers to lease space. And with it, the tax revenue to DC. It's easier to balance our budget without those lines in it. So let's cut down on our space because we have people coming in 2 to 3 days a week. We can hotel offices. We don't have to have people with full-time spaces. There's less people in every day if they're coming in at all. And private companies did the same thing. And you go from a place that follows the Camden Yards model set in 1992, where Larry Lucchino of the Orioles realized, the president at the time, if we build a ballpark downtown in the business district, everyone will get off of work and go to a restaurant and a bar and then go to the ballpark. Well, if nobody's at the businesses anymore in the business district, that model fails. And that's what's happened the last couple of years. And not only are people not going to the games as much, part of that, obviously, the play on the court and the ice, specifically for the Wizards, the court, but people aren't going to the restaurants either. Just because the Wizards have been bad at basketball isn't the reason that some of our favorite restaurants in that area have closed. People have stopped working in those areas, and so the restaurants have closed. And you see it even within Gallery Place. Like District D is a great concept and idea, and credit to Ted for being like, no, I'm going to invest in this and we're going to build it. But it replaced a private business that was like, this ain't worth it for us in Bar Louie. And so what I would do, or what I would try to do if I was the mayor, is say, we're going to turn downtown from a place that people used to work into a place that people currently live. But here's the thing. People don't really want to live in an entertainment district. Nats Park is an interesting example here where there actually are a lot of apartment buildings, and they went the luxury route, which I would beg downtown DC not to turn into. But if you want to make that argument and say, no, it's possible to do both. It's possible to have an arena where the Mystics play their 20 whatever home games during the summer, and another 200 nights a year there is concerts and circuses and ice shows and all the things that go through. They think they can get to 200. Okay. And part of the reason they haven't had as many events there is because they've had to schedule around 81 home games or 82 home games, 41 Caps, 41 Wizards. And then in May and June, they have to keep it open, especially for the Capitals over much of the last decade, because there was a thought that they would be in the Stanley Cup final. And you don't want to overbook. And so with all of that now out of the way, could you look at this opportunity to revitalize downtown by making it a place that people live and putting grocery stores in place, making, public-private partnerships with businesses to hopefully open restaurants and subsidized this and that so that low-income folks who don't have a place to live in DC can live. Because we do have a homelessness problem in this city. We do have crime problems in this city. I don't know that the crime problem is as bad as the perception, but it's no doubt worse than it has been. It is trending the wrong way. So whether or not the perception matches the reality, like, it's headed that direction. And so many of these problems, which have been studied extensively by people way smarter, I don't even way smarter, I mean, many of them are, but certainly more versed on these topics than me, will tell you that the kind of economic investment needed to pull down crime is, in education, is in after-school programs, is in creating the types of businesses that can give people jobs, and then giving them a place that they can genuinely afford to live. And because of the nature of DC, because of the limits, because of the fact that the space is mostly taken up, opportunities to build places to live in this city are extremely rare. This is a chance to do that. And it's already happening to some extent, where businesses or commercial real estate has turned into residential real estate. And there might be rezoning that needs to happen. There might be all kinds of things. And I'm sure the federal government will have something to say, and maybe even rightfully, because some of that stuff is pretty close to a lot of the very important federal buildings. But this is also, like, we're dealing with the realities that DC is governed in a way that no other city in America is. Like, we don't have a state government that overlords us. We have Congress. It's ridiculous. It's another argument for home rule. Again, different show, but like one of the few political opinions I feel I can give on this show that everyone's like, yeah, we're on board with that. Us DC folks are on board with us being able to make our own decisions, and not a congressman from Oklahoma, California, Nevada, Oregon, or Montana getting a say because this is where they go to work. And then they go home to their district. Get out of here. I mean, you're welcome to stay and do your job. Congress is important. But you don't get a say over our city. And so you shouldn't have a say over our city. And so, to me, while this is incredibly sad, and I think the best thing for the soul of the city, without question, would be to keep the Wizards and the Capitals right where they are. If you're going to do this, or if Ted has already made up his mind that he's going to do this, please, I am begging you, DC, hit him with the door on the way out. Or work with him to create an area around this arena that is a place where so many of the people who have been displaced by many of the other similar projects, whether it is MCI, Turn Verizon, Turn Capital One, whether it is what's happened in Navy Yard with Nats Park, so many people need a place to live. And it will change the nature of this city in a way that is tremendous. Take the opportunity that is presented to you. I know it is complicated. I know I've oversimplified it because I am merely a sports talk radio host and not an urban developer or an economist or an architect or a real estate developer. But the simple facts are so bare to see that this is possible in some form or fashion. Now, I would like to talk to an economist about all this, so we will. Next, it's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live on the free Odyssey app, and we're streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Clinton Yates, you do not want to miss him, coming up at 5:30. Right now, though, let us get extremely nerdy. I told you we're gonna have to talk to a lot of different people today. Adam Tusk, by the way, of NBC4, their transportation reporter, is going to join us later as well. But right now, an economist? Yeah, an economist. It's time for Not My Beat.
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not My Beat.
For more on this, we bring in really one of the experts of the experts on it, at least from the economic side of it. Andy Zimbalist has been writing about the intersection of sports and economics for 30 years, including how stadiums have affected sports, or sports stadiums have affected local economies, all of those types of things. He's a professor, he's a published author, and somehow he's wound up on a December afternoon on a sports radio show. Andy, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
So to start, I would like to kind of define what we're talking about here when it comes to the, obviously the reason we're talking about this is we have a basketball and hockey team moving out of the District of Columbia to Virginia. And the economic consensus is that stadiums are bad. Like, that's the very top line item. Stadiums are bad for economies. They don't actually provide the economic boost that is often promised by politicians. So how do you define that economic boost? What like, whose economy are we talking about here? A city budget versus what fans spend versus, obviously Ted Leonsis is doing it for a reason as the owner of these teams. He's got his own personal economy he's worried about. So we talk about the economic side of it. What is the economy that we're talking about?
Well, really, we could do any one of those three things. We could look at its impact on fans, or the impact on Ted Leonsis and his teams, or the impact on DC and Alexandria. So all of those are game for analysis. I think when stadiums are getting built or arenas are getting built, I think the more common question that gets asked by the media is, what impact is it going to have economically on the city, either DC or Alexandria, or even the state of Virginia. Most of the economic analysis that's been done on that question does suggest, as you had indicated, that there's not much gain to be made by having a new team or a new facility in your area. I think, even though that's the basic conclusion in the general case, that there have been some cases where there's a lot of private financing and where there are certain synergies between the development program and the city's needs. It's possible that you could have positive budgetary impact whereby the city budget will generate more revenue than it will generate costs. It's possible, but it's not typical. And so I think the sagest advice one could give to a city is to be extremely cautious and careful as you put down your assumptions and your numbers, and make sure that when you're lining up presumed investments from developers, that you've lined them up with a contract rather than simply a letter of agreement or a memorandum of understanding.
I was actually reading earlier today out of the Washington Post archives when the MCI Center, as it was called at the time, opened in the early 2000s, and how Abe Pollin put $200 million of his own money. There was about $60 million in public funds. Is that looked at as one of those potential success stories, the origin of this building that is now Capital One Arena, and how it changed DC is one that can work if there's the right amount of private investment?
It's conceivable that you could make that argument for the old MCI Center. In addition to Abe putting up a larger share of money than is typical, he also accepted lease terms which were unfavorable to his team. And this is something that Leonsis has been complaining about for years. He doesn't really have a right to complain about it, by the way, because when he bought, well, it was back, I think it was still the Bullets when he bought it. What's now the Wizards, when he bought it, those unfavorable lease terms, and Leonsis says it cost him $36 million a year. I'm not sure that's the right number, but he's paying a lot of money to stay in that stadium or that arena. Those unfavorable arena terms impacted the price that he was paying for the team. So he paid a lot lower price than he otherwise would have. If he had the deal that he says everybody else has, where they're paying $3 or $4 million a year for their arena, then he would have had to pay more for his team. So he's already benefited from a lower price, and now he wants both the lower price and the lease terms that he says other teams have. So, in this case, and at this point, I think it's very hard to make an economic assessment of the economic impact, because they simply haven't released very much information. They're making the claim that the additional financial obligations that the city is taking on and the state is taking on, they're making the claim that those obligations will be covered by additional revenue that will be generated by the activity, but they haven't said what assumptions they're making. They haven't given us any details whatsoever. And we know from other cases that these mixed public-private partnerships have a lot of question marks. So for instance, they're talking about a special tax zone. Special tax zone is one where you designate a certain geographic area, and then you say any additional tax revenues taken from that area will go to finance the debt service on the bonds that were issued in order to finance the construction. The problem with that, or the problem that there may be with that, is that some of the new activity that comes to this zone might be activity that moved from elsewhere in Alexandria or from elsewhere in Virginia. And so other parts of the city are going to be generating less tax revenue, even though the special tax zone will generate more. But what the city cares about is its overall resources, and the resources might not increase in that case. They go down in part A of the city, but they go up in part B. What's the net? So we have to know a lot more to be able to assess something like that.
That leads to kind of one of the big questions, I think, specific to these teams moving. And also when we're talking about the Commander Stadium, as we're joined by Andy Zimbalist, economist, author, with us here on the Hoffman Show. How different is the calculation for the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia? Because unlike when the 49ers move from San Francisco to Santa Clara, or the Warriors move from Oakland to San Francisco, they're still within the state of California. Going from the District of Columbia to Maryland, does that change the calculus for the jurisdictions involved?
Sure, it changes it somewhat. It's probably not the case that every dollar that was spent in DC on the Wizards and the Capitals, not every one of those dollars will now leave DC and go to Virginia, but a large share of them will. So for instance, if I'm a basketball fan, but I'm not a rabid basketball fan, and on Friday afternoons Friday evenings I like to take my son to a Wizards game. And now, because the Wizards aren't there anymore, but I live close to that area in Northwest DC, and I want to do something with my son that night. Maybe I'll take him to a bowling alley. Maybe I'll take him out to dinner. Maybe I'll take him to a movie theater. So I don't necessarily take the $200 I would have spent at a Wizards game and then move that and spend it in Virginia. I might spend it on other entertainment venues in DC. So so we don't know a priori or beforehand. We don't know how many people would behave like me in that example. So what percent of the money will be relocated to other entertainment venues within DC, as opposed to the same people who went to see the Wizards in DC are now going to go to Alexandria? We don't know the answer to that. It's probable that the answer is that a large chunk of those dollars will be lost by DC, and they will go to Alexandria, Virginia.
So one of the things that you've written about, that I've seen others in this space write about as well, is the opportunity cost, which is also impossible to measure. But sometimes we get to see an example like Turner Field in Atlanta. It gets moved on from in a very controversial way to Cobb County, northern suburban Atlanta. And all of a sudden, the area around Turner Field that was kind of a nothing outside of the games is revitalized in a way where there's housing and supermarkets and all those kinds of things. So if you look at what that space in DC could become, like what are the alternate options if there's not going to be an arena there, and how does like the budgets in terms of some of the other things that people bring up with DC, education, et cetera, how are those things all intertwined? What could happen? And how the budget allows for those things to move.
Well, Leonsis owns the arena, as I understand it, and he's
Although he
already
does,
said,
so he has a land lease on it, but owns the space above ground.
yeah, right,
Right.
and he has articulated a plan that he has to bring the WNBA Mystics to the arena. And he says he has some other thoughts about other events too, so that he could still have 200, 220, some similar number of events there a year. And it could still be serving a pretty functional purpose, even if it generates, say, $5 million less in city ticket tax revenue, which is, I think, roughly what would happen. It's not an enormous loss for Washington for this to happen. It's a loss, but not an enormous loss. Um, so it depends upon how much energy and resources Leonsis is willing to put into finding alternative programming for the DC arena. If Leonsis concludes after several years of trying to have alternate programming that it's not paying off, and then it's hard to imagine that arena being repurposed for some other economically viable purpose, and more likely that uh, land or urban real estate in downtown DC is very, very valuable, and you'd have to find some better use of that land, and that would probably entail knocking down the arena.
Have you seen a difference in suburban arenas and the economic impact versus urban?
There aren't that many modern suburban arenas. The era of the suburban arena was the 60s and the 1960s and 1970s. Since 1992, when Camden Yards was built, and Larry Lucchino showed us a model that basically said if you put your sports facility next to the downtown business community, that you'll be able to attract this new type of clientele, which is basically business people who work until 5:30. At the end of the day, they if the stadium is walkable distance or nearby, they walk with their colleagues to the stadium. They go to a restaurant or bar in the stadium. They have some drinks. They eat some delicious food, and then they stay and watch the game. That's a model that Lucchino basically brought to the sports world, that everybody has followed since 1992, and it's been a very productive model. Now, if what happens is that as a result of the emergence and the rapid growth of remote work, people aren't going into the office anymore, or say half the people that used to go to downtown offices aren't going anymore, then that model becomes vitiated. It's a weaker model than it used to be. Now, if that happens at the same time, and this is one of the things you raised, the Cobb County case with the Braves.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that tends to be true about suburban land is it's further away from concentrations of residential areas, and it's further away from business concentrations. And so the land tends to be less expensive than center city land. And so if you combine the possible effect of remote work with cheaper land, it might be the case, again, as what happened in Cobb County, it might be the case that we get a reversal. And the trend that started to happen in the 80s and 90s of central city construction might start to reverse itself, or at least present a more mixed picture.
Andy Zimbalist, he's an economist, an author, a professor, with us here on the Hoffman Show for another minute or two. And really the last kind of topic I want to touch on with you, Andy, is the non-monetary impact of this. And I'm sure, the nature of an economist is you're always trying to put a number on something, because otherwise you can't quantify it. That's the point. But when you go to a movie theater, for instance, I've used this analogy a couple times today. If you go to a movie theater, you don't expect a return on your investment. You expect to go see a good movie. So the idea that going to a sporting event would cost something is fine, even if you pay some of that in taxes or however we pay that as citizens. So is there a way to measure kind of the social impact of this, of a basketball team that is beloved in a city, and also the hockey team, but specifically to the District of Columbia, the basketball team leaving, and kind of the emotional gut punch of that? How do you try to quantify that, if you try to quantify that?
Yeah, well, it's a complicated question, and I'd be happy to talk about it for the next 2 or 3 hours. We don't
Great.
have that much
All
time,
right.
but
So this is now
no,
the Andes
listen.
and Bala show.
Right. Um, if you go to, you raise the question of going to a movie, and let's
Mhm.
say that it costs $10 to go to a movie where you're living. Well, then you can quantify it. You know that the value that I receive for going to the movie when I buy a $10 ticket is at least $10. I might get some surplus. Maybe I get $14 of
Yeah,
pleasure out
you
of it.
love the movie, right?
But I know that maybe I'm anticipating at least a $10 return. There is a methodology that's used. I'm not crazy about it. It's called contingent valuation methodology, and basically what it is a fancy survey technique where you go and you ask people how much money would you be willing, how many additional dollars of tax would you be willing to pay if you could keep the Wizards in DC.
Mm.
And on the basis of a survey like that, you can generate some estimates of what the psychic or community value is. But I think, as your question suggested, I think in reality, what's going on with a sports team, at least has historically gone on with sports teams, is that it helps create community. It's something that brings the community together. You can talk about it over the water cooler at work. You could be at a stadium, and the center fielder on your team hits a home run in the bottom of the ninth, and you win. And you turn to the guy or the woman next to you, and you high five them, even though you never saw them before in your life. Why is that? Because you're all rooting for the same team. You're all part of the community. And even though it might not be the most profound expression of community that you can imagine, it's something that's gratifying and fun to be part of a community like that. And so, yes, those elements of value are certainly there from a sports team, and I think those same elements of value justify to some degree some public support for stadium building. What's unfortunate is that we're in a situation, and it's exemplified now with Virginia and DC. We're in a situation where there's open competition between two cities to retain a sports team. And why do the sports teams or Ted Leonsis get to have that happen? Because in the NHL and the NBA, they're monopolies and they restrict output in order to get better value for their output, at higher prices. And this is what Leonsis is benefiting from here, and this is what other owners throughout the professional sports have benefited from historically.
Yeah. Man, there's so many other things that I would love to talk. We could go talking about this stuff for hours. Leon's has just got a bunch of money from the Qataris, and then he's asking public money, and then there's the larger economic forces at play. Pandemic adjacent and not, just kind of trends of different things since the 70s, really, in terms of the billionaire class versus the rest of us trying to buy tickets. But perhaps we'll save those for another day. Andy, this was so insightful. Thank you so much for your time. It's
You don't
greatly
want to talk
appreciated.
about Ohtani's contract?
I would love to talk about Ohtani's contract. That honestly, that was what I was planning on doing in part today. Is like, hey, are we still cool just going to baseball games, rooting for guys making $70 million? And must it be nice to be able to defer $68 million a year down the road because you're making so much in other
What's
things?
important to understand, and not many sports journalists have really understood this, is when you take the present value of what he's getting paid, we're at
Mhm.
$68 million a year for the last 10 years after he's done playing, deferred
Right.
money. If you take the present value of that, it turns out to be something on the order of $37 million a year, or a total of $370 million. So they're talking about this record-breaking contract, which it is in nominal terms, but because it's spread so far into the future, the current value of it is actually below the value that Trout got, or the value that Judge got.
I know there's also
So
tax
it's an awful
implications
lot
as
of
well.
money, to be sure.
Yeah.
It's an awful lot of money. But not only does that situation lower the actual value of it, but it's also the case that it helps the Dodgers a great deal because they won't have to pay as much luxury tax. So
Right.
there's a lot of kind of economic fine points that are behind this that I don't think have been fully assessed yet and understood.
Well, I also know that he can kind of fuddle with the taxes as well, because if he is retired at that point, which you'd presume he
That's
would
not.
be
See,
based
that's
off his
also
ES,
that's a misapprehension. That's not true.
it's so
It's
he
not true.
still gets.
States charge taxes on money that's earned in the state. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter if you get paid the next year or not. If you earn the money while you're playing in the state, and he'll play 81 games a year, at Dodger Stadium. He'll play about
Right.
7 or 8 or 9 games a year in San Francisco. He'll play the same amount in San Diego, and so he'll end up getting about maybe 65% of his money from playing in California. He'll have to pay California high income taxes,
Okay.
which are 13.3%. But he'll have to pay them whether he gets that money in 2024 or 2034 or 2042. Whether he's living in Tokyo or he's living in Miami or he's living in Los Angeles, he's got to pay them anyway because the money was earned while he was playing in Los Angeles.
Gotcha. So the jock tax can't escape it, is what we've learned.
It's not easy. Maybe they're going to try a new technique, but it's unlikely that that Newsom and his colleagues will allow that to
happen. There you go. Learned something else that we didn't even plan on. Thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Talk to you. My pleasure.
All right, that is Andy Zimbalist, who is an economist, a professor at Smith College. And as you hear, published author, studied all this stuff. Really fascinating insight from him. Now, he was one of the people that I really wanted to talk to today. But the man who will join us next is the person that I wanted to talk to the most. Find out who it is and why and hear their insight next. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. And always live on the free Odyssey app. show on the Team 980, always live on the free Odyssey app. We are a one-topic show today. We are talking, of course, about the move of Monumental Sports' teams, the Capitals and Wizards, probably to Potomac Yards. This is a non-binding deal. And when this story broke, there was one person I wanted to talk about it, someone who lived in D.C. for 40 years, someone who shaped my view of D.C. sports as much as anybody because I'm lucky to call him one of my best friends. He also commentates on sports professionally, but has covered DC Metro as well back in his days for the Washington Post. Washington Post graduate, ESPN's, and frequent Hoffman show guest. It is a Wednesday. It just so happens. You'd be coming on the show today no matter what. But, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Clint Yates.
What's going on, Gregory? I really appreciate the kind words. And yeah, this one hits home pretty hard. So much so that I decided to wear my Le Boulay shirt for this interview. Yeah. For those of you who are not tuned in on YouTube, I am wearing an old school red Bullets shirt, sir, because your boy has been to the Capitol Center quite a few times.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm glad you told people that it was a Bullet shirt because while I have gotten through enough French on Duolingo to understand the Le Boulay reference there, I don't anticipate everyone has. Okay, so I do not want to lead the witness, if you will. Yeah. You see the news this morning. You see Leonsis and Yunkin, et cetera, et cetera. What is your reaction to this from whatever angle that you want to attack it from?
Well, my first reaction was this feels like a real attempt at a power play from Theodore that I'm not sure I understand. Really grand basic level, I think that Theodore is grandly underestimating people's willingness to dislike him. And I think that matters for a couple different reasons. Number one is that that's always been a big part of who he is. Being popular was always very important to him. And I think almost to a fault that has kind of gone the other way. And number two is that there are people that will walk away from the Wizards. Like, let's be clear about that from an NBA franchise standpoint. And the Caps are a different discussion. We can sort of parse that to the side, as are the Mystics. But I think that if you're thinking about the NBA, because of the town that DC is, in terms of being a basketball town in the lifeblood, the idea of moving the NBA squad out of the city based on a land deal just feels like such a massive disconnect from the reality of what sports fans really want in this town, never mind as an experience, but as a product. And I really hope that for whatever Theodore thinks that this is going to be, that quite frankly, it works for him, because I haven't seen one single person who cares about basketball, who cares about the Wizards, and who cares about DC who has said, yeah, this is a good idea. Not one. You know what I mean? And that alone, on simple anecdotal evidence, never mind my own knowledge and brain trust about the situation, is enough to tell me, yikes, off the rip.
Yeah, to me, it's so complicated. But the simplest part of it is exactly what you just said. Like the heart and soul of the matter, the feelings, the emotions, which is what makes sports so great, is that it sucks to see a basketball team leave a city, and especially a city like DC with such a, like, one of the things that I have written down in my notes for today to discuss and parse out is the fact that the Wizards have been largely irrelevant in the NBA for 40 years. Like, what level of impact does that have on this? Because, you know, we can talk about the economics, but the economics change if they're good. So, like, you know, he can complain all he wants about the investment and the area and all that kind of stuff, but he hasn't put a competitive team out there except for whatever level of competitiveness Karan and that crew was in Arenas back in the early 2010s. That was over 10 years ago at this point. That's as close to competitive as he has gotten a team here since he started owning the team 25 years ago. And that seems like a relevant plot point as well. And I also think it's interesting that they're doing this in the aftermath of hiring Michael Winger and Will Dawkins to run the team, who now it feels like they have, by the way, a clock on them. You better have a competitive team by 2028 when you open this new arena.
Yes. And the reason why it's also particularly puzzling is because it's like, how did you ever expect people to like you or care about this product to begin with if they weren't good? That's the whole thing, is that it was cashing in on a certain love of the game that I don't think Ted earned, quite frankly. That love of the game had nothing to do with anything that he built. It had nothing to do with anything that was a part of his process, being the principal owner of this team. They drafted John Wall when he got there. And guess what? They threw him out on a rail too. Like, do you think people have forgotten about that? Do you think you can just dismiss people that everybody likes and expect people to come up and still enjoy the product? Phil Chenier and Steve Buckhantz, shouts to y'all. I'm talking about them too. These are the kinds of mistakes and misunderstandings of your own fan base that lead you to positions to think that it's reasonable to just walk away because people aren't trying to consume your product in the same way. Like, this is obvious, even to the most basic person, that, yeah, you've got to have a good NBA team there, or else none of this works. That is the fundamental tenet of the entire situation. Of course, the Capitals won a Stanley Cup. Of course, it worked out for the arena, but that's still the NHL. The NBA is the league making money hand over fist, not named the NFL, in this country, and has the highest sort of likability quotient, particularly for towns in which the football team may or may not be the biggest deal in town. In this case, it happens to be. This is what happens, Craig, when you spend all your time competing for headlines with other owners in the city. And then when it comes up that they are actually doing other things, all of a sudden, you've actually got to produce as the person that has a product on hand. That is what has not happened. And so there's an unfortunate circumstance of those two things coming together at the same time. In addition to that, and I don't want to get anybody in trouble because I know how this business works and I know the buildings that you're in. But the idea that once he decided he was going to try to start taking over media companies became clear. It was evident to me that the message control element was a much bigger deal to him than anything that had to do with the product actually being produced. And that, to me, was the first downfall of what ultimately I think all of this is. And it's still indicative in how all of this goes. Bro, you had to know that this was going to be a disaster. And nobody was going to turn around and say, okay, just because Gallery Place and downtown DC isn't what it is post-pandemic means that that's a good enough reason for you to bolt. That is just a ridiculous assessment of the situation to me. And number two, he owns the building. This is the risk that you incur when you do this. The whole idea that it should be by default and 50-50 risk assessment between a city and an owner is what's flawed. And so when people start talking about how, well, I mean, of course he should leave. That's the whole deal. He should have a right to make money. Yeah, but dude, you're a billionaire. The whole point is that you're providing something to people that other people cannot equate to, and you're the one that gets to do that. You provide the fun part. Of course, there's more risk to be taken on, and of course, sometimes it's not always going to be great. The idea that you should be allowed to pop around from place to place in a particular region just to maximize profits, like, yeah, okay, but some of us aren't, I hate to use this pun, that big of capitalists. Some people just want to see a product that is consistent and in a place that they like, because that's what the fun part is ultimately, because again, it's just sports.
Clint Yates with us, of course, ESPN, Around the Horn, Anscape, ESPN.com, also ESPN Daily. Make sure you check out the podcast, daily. There's so much to unpack there with Leonsis and with all of this. So let me keep going on that thought process before we circle to another element of this and what I think has been an unpopular take for me over the last 24 hours that I'm curious to get your thoughts on.
Okay.
The Leonsis piece in terms of the money, I find, I don't know if appalling is too strong or it's actually the right word. This dude in June just got investments from the Qataris. And to me, if you're the first owner in on the NBA's loosening of, hey, cool, we're allowed a small percentage of non-controlling, a non-controlling interest in a franchise for a sovereign wealth fund, and you go into business with not the most savory of governments, if you know anything about how the Qataris just put on the World Cup, where somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 people died, most whom were basically slaves that they imported from other countries. It's not great. And then you come and ask DC, who is struggling financially in a tremendous way, for $600 million. Like, again, from a business standpoint, can I fault him from going to Virginia because they're willing to give him some money and work with him in a different way? No, but like I do think there's a lack of reading the room here, and it goes, by the way, to your piece on Monumental as a network as well. Like I don't have a problem saying it.
Yeah.
You're not going to get anybody in trouble in this building. Our friends who work over there, they understand the score. And I don't begrudge them for taking the checks because I'm sure Ted pays all right.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like there does seem to be either a misread of the room, but I actually don't think it's a misread of the room. And I think he cares. He just cares about the money more. And it comes down to priorities versus like, oh, he doesn't care or he's not smart enough to realize it. No, he's plenty smart enough. It's just his priority seems to be the money.
On top of that, what's unfortunate about that is that would be fine if it felt like he cared a little bit more about what's actually happening on the court or on the ice. And what's going to happen with ESA as well? Like all of a sudden, the Mystics are moving back to Capareña. All of a sudden, that where the city poured in a bunch of money to rebuild that just becomes
so the go-go can play there.
We
like,
don't exactly know what, it's like, dude, you can't just move in a vacuum based on your whims about the rent of one particular or the land lease of one particular building. Like I just it's kind of unfathomable to me. You talk about appalling. That's the word I would use. That like this is really just about the money. Like I'm sorry if that's what you're going to say. This is all this is. Well, then don't tell me that you named the team the Go-Go because you were trying to connect with the community. Don't tell me that all these other efforts that you try to, I don't want to say propagandize, but sell.
Bro, they are unveiling the Boundary Stone court like tonight. And I will say this, they have done a really good job. I think the Wizards specifically have done a better job than any of the other teams of being like, we belong to the district.
Right.
We're like, yes, of course we care about everybody in the DMV, but like, hey, this is basketball. This is DC. This is the district. And now they're gone.
They're literally selling jerseys at this moment that say those words on the front. Like and at some point you think to yourself, man, is this really going to be how we find out that the emperor has no clothes? Because ultimately, the product that everybody wants is to be able to gather and root for the home team in a way that brings everybody together in the simplest manner possible. This is not rocket science. This is not even rocket surgery, to quote a funny movie. It's just, if the greed becomes so obvious, it doesn't even matter if it makes sense, because the only thing it makes sense to is making more cash. And for all of you fans who get caught up in being so aligned to a franchise that you seem to think that the things that make more money for the owner are in the best interest of you by default, that's a scary thought. What you want as a fan is the priority to bring you the most joy. Doesn't seem like this is doing it for anybody that I've asked or anybody that's told me.
So I will ask one more question along that line, and then I want to get to what it means for the city.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a chance, this is a little bit devil's advocate, but also I think a logistically fair question. Is there a chance we're overreacting here? That at the end of the day, like it's metro accessible. It's like 5 extra stops on the yellow line. As Ted said, like they call it National Airport and everyone thinks of it as DC's airport, but it's in Virginia. Like, it's really not that far. So is there a chance that in 2028, we're all like, oh, this is fine. And the fact that they do have a world-class practice facility and better whatever could actually benefit the team in the long run. And the imaginary lines on the ground that obviously have very real consequences, but someone drew them there. They weren't. There's no whatever in the way. I guess there's a river. But like that the border is actually not that big of a deal, and that because it isn't that far, it's still metro accessible, et cetera, that a bunch of people who live in DC and Maryland are shouting, and all the Virginia fans are like, hey, actually this is better for us, and it's just serving a slightly different part of the DMV in terms of accessibility.
My friend, all of that may be true. But that little boundary you called the river is quite frankly a major psychological hurdle for a lot of people in the area that must be taken seriously, something that's easy to understand if you've been here for all of 5 seconds.
Or you follow any of the DC dating meme accounts.
This is what I'm saying, bro. People are not crossing that river even for the holiest of the holies, so to speak, And what I'm saying is that yes, it might be an overreaction in the context of in a strict, if we're playing a board game way, but in the reality of what's on the ground, ripping the NBA franchise out of downtown DC as an experience to Potomac Yard. When was the last time you went to Arlington or Alexandria, Craig?
Probably I wound up in Arlington, 3-4 times a year, at least. Alexandria once or
Are
twice.
you hearing the verbs you're using? You wound up there. You know what I'm saying? Like just that
Yeah,
word
but like
alone.
I go, it just depends. I'm also someone who thinks that people generally, like, unpopular opinion here, I think people way undervalue, like, DC folks should explore more of the DMV.
This
like,
isn't just
good
about
stuff in
DC
Maryland.
folks. This is about Maryland folks who won't go to Virginia either, and Virginia folks who won't go to
100%.
Maryland. This is all interconnected. My point is that, okay, Potomac Yards ain't that great. And to get to the airport point, people go to the airport to leave town, not to enjoy what's around the airport. That analogy doesn't even make
Right,
sense.
but the point is that it's not far. Then people think of it as like, oh yeah, that's the DC airport versus the suburban Dulles.
Yes, but it's not
and
far because of the
BWI.
nature of the building, not because it's not far if you're going to be there, I'd just say 40 times a year when you don't live anywhere near it. And look, I get it. Virginia fans could probably fill in a lot of the people that weren't going anyway, but I just don't think in general it's that good of an idea. Never mind all of how I feel about the cultural element of it. So, yeah, listen. Do I think Potomac Yards or whatever insert made-up name we have here has the right to
National landings apparently being floated.
Right, exactly. Amazon and all these other places, do they have the right to grow on their own? Sure. But it just feels so cheap, for lack of a better term, to just pop over to Alexandria. Like, what? Are you being serious here? People who are fans of the football team have been arguing for decades about getting the team back into the city, and you've got one little measly issue, which I'm going to call it because, again, you own the building. You're going to pop over Alexandria. The whole point of building ownership is that you are somewhat committed to the landscape around you for the long run. I get it. You want the mayor to clean up all the crime and all this other stuff. But again, sorry there was a pandemic. Sorry people aren't coming back. These are the risks you take when you buy buildings as a billionaire. It just seems like it's so lame to be like, oh, well, yeah, obviously we have a good reason to leave. No, you feel like a bully. It seems like there's a billionaire being a bully for something that billionaire doesn't deserve.
Good devil's advocate question, Craig. Great take, Clinton. Really got it going. Got you wound up. But I do think, like, I don't know, it's also easier for me, but I have disposable income and just
Sure.
the time, to go there. And it's different. And I fully acknowledge that privilege in terms of that it's probably not as big of a deal for me to go to Potomac Yards, whereas a lot of people that have been going to Wizards games for a long time, it will be. And I think that's an important reality to acknowledge.
Not to mention who it's going to affect in terms of the employment in the buildings. That's something I think about a lot when it comes to Black folks in DC and how the entire fabric and framework human-wise operates when it comes to these functions.
So that leads us to the city. And here's my, I don't even know if it's like my take, but like a theory that I have floated that I think is very well backed in the research that I think should be up for consideration here, which is that this could be a tremendous opportunity for DC.
Okay.
As much as it hurts the soul, it is very clear that the economics say stadiums are bad for cities. They don't make the money back. Now, I would also push back on the pure economists and say, like, yeah, they're entertainment. When you go to the movies, you don't expect a return on your investment. You expect to see a movie. So, like, there's pushback there. But on the investment side, on the money side, it's often sold as like, hey, this thing is going to bring business to the area. And it's like, actually, it's probably not. And I think that because of these gigantic macroeconomic factors, AKA the whole world economy has changed post-pandemic. Specifically, urban economies have changed. And areas like downtown DC, which, to be clear, is a business district. There are law firms and every other kind of business that are like major companies that had business space down there. And those places are empty because of hybrid work now. And with that said, Ted's got a land lease. I would kick him off the land and be like, nah, bro, you left. I would reimagine that area, by the way, in a city with building height limits, which limits your ability to build housing because you can't build up. You can only build out. You've now created a massive potential area of space they're already converting a lot of business buildings into condos and housing. If I'm the city, I look at this as an opportunity to create affordable housing or subsidized housing or whatever version of that. Please do not build any more freaking luxury condos,
Right.
but build affordable housing. So put food in a food desert. Outside of that giant that's on 7th Street, like you get south of that, there's not a lot of grocery stores. So let's get those. The restaurants can stay if they want to, because now all of a sudden you're going to have people living there, and you can have gyms and all these other things that happen in all these other neighborhoods. And you could revitalize that area, not as a place that people work and then go to events, because people don't live in an area where you go to events. They can make it a place that people live. And I think if they don't take that opportunity, I feel like that's a loss. And you do what the Atlanta did with Turner Field when they moved to Cobb County, and the revitalization of that area has been real.
That's the exact argument that a lot of people have been using for the RFK site for many years, and I do not discount it whatsoever. The only reason I don't think that is lines up with what the reality of right now is, not that it's incorrect, and I'll get to that in a second, is that the building's already there. And that's the main issue, is that this would be one thing if we were talking about starting something new and options from zero, but that's not the case.
What's going to have to happen with RFK.
Correct. And the other thing is that, guess what? They could do that anyway. And so could Theodore in terms of revitalizing areas. I mean that in terms of affordable housing and whatever. I realize the space isn't the same. But overall, I just think it sends such a bad message from Monumental to say, well, when the going gets rough, we're gone. Like, that's so antithetical to the reason why Abe Poland was there to begin with, number one. And number two, like, bro, this is what we're all trying to do, is make the space livable for everybody. As a sports owner, to think that you just get to dart in, dart out as it suits your fancy, that to me feels so disingenuous. And so, yes, of course I agree with you. Like, there's a million places I would love to use to recreate or repurpose for affordable housing, particularly in that part of town where so many people, as you know, you can see on the street struggling. So that's not, to me, mutually exclusive. Although I do think there is something to be said for the city being like, if you want to go, you're gone. Give us the building back. You don't get to do both. And he said today, Leonsis did, oh yeah, he's going to keep that building filled. The Mystics will play there. It's a growth opportunity. And there'll be all sorts of other things. Well then, bro, why are you leaving? You know what I'm saying? Like, this doesn't make sense. None of the logic actually adds up. And most of it isn't even that emotional. If I'm being honest, like, this doesn't seem like a smart thing to do, considering what could be versus what was. And that's where I'm just baffled at all these people who are like, well, Ted's got a right to do this. Ted's got a right to do that. Like, who are you rooting for? Are you rooting for the team? Are you rooting for your friends? Are you rooting for other fans? Are you rooting for a guy to make more money on a land deal? Like, I'm just never going to understand that.
Do you think that obviously Bowser and City Council came out last night after the deal was basically done? Like, everyone's like, oh, crap, there's an announcement tomorrow.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, here's $500 million. And Leonsis had wanted $6 million. Do you think that Bowser and City Council made a mistake dragging their feet on this?
Yes, but not in the way that many people think that they do. I think that they figured that Ted would not have the audacity to walk out on a building he owns from downtown DC, some of the most prime real estate in the city, as an opportunity to go somewhere else. That said, I do think that this last offer was, and I'm stealing this from a tweet, I'm sorry, I did not see who it was by, that basically said this is the equivalent of, you know, pulling up to McDonald's at the drive-thru at 9:59 and ordering everything off the breakfast menu, you know? And like, I get that part, but I just think that in good faith operation, there's no real world when you can look at having a sort of, I don't know, introductory press conference that's non-binding with another civic leader across the way is going to score you points with the people that were supporting your business to begin with. That's the issue here. It's just like, man, who do you think you are on a lot of levels? Why do you think this is going to work? And even if it does, at what cost? And is the cost always monetary? That's always going to be an issue for sports owners in general. Is the cost monetarily worth the cost of the emotion and the passion of your fans? If you don't have winning teams, you'll never really be able to understand that relationship quite well anyway.
So that actually kind of reminded me, what we were going to talk about today is if player salaries are getting out of control after the Ohtani contract. And that also seemed relevant here, but that's probably going to wind up being our topic for next week. Thank you, sir, for your perspective as always, and for making me a lot smarter on all these topics over the years. And we'll talk to you about players making
Go
lots of money instead of
Bullets.
billionaires.
Go Bullets. Go Bullets. You the man. You the man. That's the reason I'm not a Theodore fan. Goodbye, Gregory.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.
The Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, and of course streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980, where if you're watching, you see a voice that you also get to see on TV, which is nice. NBC4's Adam Tuss is with us to discuss yet another angle to this story. And Adam, as you know, as well as anyone else, traffic and how all that's going to work is as important in DC as any aspect of any story, especially when you got major movement like this. So for those that don't know, Adam covers traffic and commutes and all these things down to, the metro and all that for NBC4. So when you hear this news about Monumental taking their teams from Virginia or from DC to Virginia and this new Potomac Yards metro station and all the traffic on Route 1, like where does your head go with all of this in terms of how it will affect people going to these games?
Yeah, the first thing that I thought of is how is this going to work? Because if you're familiar with Route 1 at all in Northern Virginia, all of us have been to Reagan National Airport. You know what it's like coming off of 395, having to go across a bridge. Route 1 here in Northern Virginia and Alexandria, it already carries about 25,000 vehicles a day through rush hours. It's pretty slammed. The lights here aren't particularly well timed. They've been trying to build a rapid bus network down the middle of Route 1, but that is got low ridership at this point in time. And really, what everyone said today about this transportation plan that's going to go on here is they're putting all their hopes on one metro station, and it's the newest metro station, Potomac Yard. That is an infill station. And what that means is they basically just built this station above the tracks, right? So it's not like it was like, they dug into the ground, built this from, the existing metro system. It was something that's been planned for a long time, but it's an infill station. So it doesn't necessarily have all the bells and whistles that you might need to support this kind of crush of people going at one particular point in time. I'm not saying it can't handle it. I'm just saying that normally when you design a metro station around something like this, it's got some things built into it to help with massive crowds. And specifically this particular metro station, I've just taken a kind of quick look at the plans. There's like one entrance and one exit that's right next to the stadium. And if you've been to Nats Park, I mean, you go up a Navy Yard and really there's really only one main entrance that people use there. You know what that's like. So think about like one one person who doesn't have their smart trip card, right? Or the line queues up and it's just like
Right.
people are getting frustrated. Those are things that are going to have to be addressed. If this all does pan out and you're putting all your hopes on one metro station, those are things you have to think about. When you think about like Gallery Place, right? When you think about where Capital One Arena is right now, one of the things that I've been thinking about with all of this is like, even if you didn't want to use Gallery Place, you could still use Metro Center, right? Which is a couple blocks away. You could go to Mount Vernon Square and you could walk a couple of blocks. There's all these metro stations in downtown DC that you could essentially use and then either walk or rideshare or whatever you want to do. Here, that is not the case. It is going to be this one metro station. And if something goes wrong, you know, some track work or something happens with a train, we're in big trouble.
Wow. That is intense. The Metro card thing just gave me like shivers. Also, because as many people know, our station is located not too far from Nats Park, and my show ends at 7:00. I am often the fish swimming upstream into all those people coming in out of that one spot for Nats Park. The fact that the Nats weren't very good this year made that a little bit easier. But it's certainly a problem that I hope to have in more severity moving forward. Come on, Nats, let's rebuild this thing. I also think it's pretty fascinating that they are already talking about like, oh, they would probably be like, oh, Adam, we know this. Like, that's why we're talking about expansion. But I'm also reading all these stories, including, you know, your reporting about how much trouble Metro is in right now. The kind of stuff that their CEO just proposed, like shutting down the tracks after 10:00 every night, cutting out 10 stations. How realistic is it for them to just be like, oh, yeah, don't worry about that. We'll build this thing up by the time 2028 opens, or this arena opens in 2028.
Yeah. Craig, let me let you in a little secret here. Metro says as part of this plan to close the $750 million budget gap for next year, by the way. That's only next year the gap that they have to close. That you mentioned, they would close the 10 lowest ridership stations. Do you know which one of those stations is the 10 lowest ridership stations?
I'm going to guess Potomac Yards is very high on that list.
Potomac Yard is one of the lowest ridership stations at this point. Now, obviously, that would change if you put an arena here, but that's a nugget that we're going to start to pull on. Like, this is all stuff you have to think of. And the transportation sources that I've been talking to about this story today, I would say we are at the very beginning of putting together a coordinated transportation plan for this area. You know, I'll speak personally and just anecdotally, like FedEx Field, however you feel about it, it's hard to get to. The metro station isn't right there. It's actually like half a mile away that you have to walk to after you get off. If this becomes a thing where it's hard to get to, that will matter. People won't want to go. And so they're going to have to figure this out really quickly. I've been talking to a lot of people today who are like, yeah, we don't like, there's not like a plan to build some sort of secret highway into here. There is plans for like an underground parking garage. And there are plans to kind of retime some of the traffic signals along Route 1. But if this turns into a thing where it's really hard to get to, then you have that feeling of, and again, however you feel about FedEx, there are people who feel like it's just really hard to get to. And that's why they don't want to go there.
Everyone feels like that about FedEx. Even people that are like, it's not that bad. Like,
I'm trying to be kind. I'm trying to.
Yeah, it sucks. I go there when there's no traffic because I do the pregame show, and like it still sucks to get there when I get to drive right in. And you know, there's roads closed down, and they have to reorganize traffic and everything. And I don't know. It's definitely a less. I mean, there obviously are like neighborhoods and stuff around, but I think it's a little bit different than some of the brand new stuff that's just been built over in Alexandria.
And
again.
Let me say really quick,
go ahead.
You mentioned neighborhoods. Well, here in Alexandria, where this is all being built, I mean, people who are familiar with this area, you know, there's the Target, there's the Old Navy, and the Michaels.
Target, which by the way is going to survive according to the plans.
Well, it should. It's like, I think it's like one of the grossing Targets, like in the whole Target brand. So how do you just lose that? But there are really, when you talk about neighborhoods, this is going to be so interesting because they tried this here before, right? Like Jack Kent Cooke tried to build a stadium here before. And the residents here basically defeated that plan. Well, there are like 2 neighborhood roads that connect to Route 1 and 395 here, and that's it. So where do you think all the traffic is going to come from the highway? It's going to go right through these people's front yards. And the community here is pretty vocal about, you know, what they want, what they don't want. While all of this seems like it's a done deal, the more and more that I peel back layers of this, there are so many questions that have to be answered about how this is going to work. I'm not saying it can't work, just saying there's a lot of questions that have to be worked. You know, Virginia just lost the FBI, right? So they're going to Greenbelt. That was a big story. These are also political wins for people to be able to pull some of this stuff away. And there's tons of politics behind this right now.
Yeah, definitely. Adam Tuss is with us, covers transportation for NBC4. One of the things that I am intrigued by that I kind of think is just on a pure geographic sense, a little bit of overreaction is like the amount of DC and Maryland folks that are unwilling to go to Virginia. And as a millennial who has Instagram, I always do laugh at all of the memes. It's like, oh, you got to get your passport. Oh, I'm dating a guy. He's so far away. He's in Arlington. It's like, you have to cross the river. But I also have been around this area since 2015, and I know it's real, even though I'm someone, because of the nature of my work, who travels all over the DMV, although I probably got nothing on you. That is literally part of your job, is to travel all over the DMV.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of Virginia folks that won't go to Maryland, Maryland folks that won't go to Virginia, DC folks that are like, it's outside those boundary stones we just learned about thanks to the Wizards jerseys. I'm not going there. So when you look at like the movement of people, and do you think that the crowds itself will be heavily affected? And we might have to go back and study the historical precedent of when the team moved from RFK to FedEx for this.
Yeah.
But kind of that idea of, we're talking about different groups of people that live different lives, all if they're in the same region, or is it all overridden by the fact that if you're a basketball fan, you're going to go. If you're a hockey fan, you're going to go.
Well, I heard an interesting comment actually on your station today. I forget who said it, but to use the old cliche, they said, if you build it, they will come, right? Like, so here's the thing. I mean, the territorial aspects that you're talking about are very real. We all know that in the DMV. Maryland and Virginia, I would say, probably have the two biggest beefs with one another. And, you know, everyone kind of shares the district or whatever. And DC people just don't want to go anywhere. So that's, which is fine. But I think ultimately, I mean, it comes down to them putting a good product out there, right? Like, what have the Wizards, what have the Wizards been? They've been abysmal. Like, who, and so, like, are you giving people a reason to travel to watch that? I mean, the Capitals, I would say, well, the Capitals are basically already here, right? They practice in Arlington. So they already have a footprint in Northern Virginia. So I think that, you know, just from what I see, I live in Northern Virginia. So I know that there's a lot of Capitals fans around here. To see if you would now gain this new fan base of Wizards fans who previously might not have wanted to go into the city, I think that would be interesting too. But what does it mean for someone, you know, from Rockville? Do they want to come all the way down here? Because you're taking that ride on the metro. That's, you know, that's a long way to get down here.
If we got time for one more, I got one more on that front.
Go for it.
So you have undoubtedly studied, I'm making an assumption here, but undoubtedly, as someone who covers transportation, you've studied how traffic has changed since the pandemic.
Yep.
And I think so much of this is happening because of the change of downtown DC due to the pandemic. And so, you know, we had on the show earlier today an economics professor who talked about there's not really, like, because hybrid work and everything is so new, it's hard to know if the model of putting, that was really started with Camden Yards in 1992, of putting a stadium in a business district with the idea that people would go after work, is dead, because hybrid work is so new. As someone who's looked at these traffic patterns and looked at how people move around throughout their days, do you have any thoughts on that element, that maybe a suburban stadium is a better idea now than it would have been in 2019?
Well, I think you've seen it in the district itself, right? I think that there are all these other contributing factors that are bleeding into this. And, you know, I mean, you might say whatever you want about crime. There is that perception that some parts of Gallery Place have gotten unsafe. A lot of that is because our federal workforce isn't going back at the full capacity and full tilt that they once were. You know, Metro ridership is still about half of what it was pre-pandemic. They're down to thousands of trips per day. I will say traffic itself, in terms of vehicular traffic, that seems to be coming back, but now it seems to be spread out over the entire. In other words, you know, you might have a lot more people working remotely who are going to run errands or picking up kids or doing any of that kind of stuff. I've seen studies that our region, the DMV, and San Francisco, were the two biggest telework communities in the entire country, and that really has stuck. So maybe there is a case to say, you know, a suburban model, a suburban stadium works here because people don't have the same commuting patterns. And I can say for sure, you know, the federal government hasn't been called back to go back to their offices full time yet. So that pattern, that travel pattern that we were all used to pre-pandemic, it has not come back to the way that it was before. So there might be something to suggest that would work here. But realistically, I mean, I covered when they had to retrofit Navy Yard in the metro station there, which, I mean, you probably remember what Navy Yard used to look like before the ballpark was there. It was a ghost town.
Yeah.
I covered when they had to retrofit that station because of the crush of people that they were expecting here. We won't know how all of this works until it goes into effect. But I will say this, they better come up with some good plans, because as it is right now, this will not work.
Very well put. Adam Tuss, NBC4, covers transportation. The metro ridership thing is crazy to me, and I think also is a huge factor here, because it was so easy to get to Gallery Place and Capital One by metro. I mean, still is and will be till 2028, but I guess you go there starting in 2028. There's not going to be a game to watch. Adam, thanks so much. We look forward to your reporting on this throughout the next couple of days, weeks, and probably months, that sounds like.
Yeah, and a lot of reporting coming up on NBC4 tonight. Plug for our station. There we go.
Yes, of course. Keep watching that NBC4. And, if the reporting from earlier in the day as well, NBC4.com. Adam, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, that is Adam Tuss with us here on the Hoffman Show. When we get back, we will recap some of the thoughts that I started the show with. Obviously, a lot of you guys, I don't know, maybe some of you are listening, and you have been since the very start of things, but I'm guessing most of you weren't listening at 4 o'clock, so I'll recap some of my high-level thoughts on this, and then we'll wrap up the show with real things, real people said in real microphones as well. And I still need to tell, I haven't, because we've just been doing, obviously, the biggest news all day, but I still need to tell my story about jury duty yesterday. So we'll get to that coming up as well. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app.
Hey.
It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. For the first time today, Anthony Haney, you haven't spoken to a microphone all day. You haven't been on camera all day. Keeping you from the people. I'm so sorry. How you doing, buddy?
I'm all right. You know, things are things.
Taking in this wild show where we're talking about economics and districting and all kinds of stuff that is not your typical Wednesday sports show. By the way, I'm going to say I actually accidentally Freudian slip said Commanders like in the first segment. Haven't mentioned them basically since. Like, we are in the middle of December. There are 4 games left in the season, and it was not even worth my time today to mention them outside of this. Crazy.
What a relief, huh?
Kind of. I'm glad we have something else to talk about.
Okay.
And honestly, good to kind of spend the rest of the week on this. Game this weekend's whatever. News item, Commanders cut Danny Johnson because they signed a guy who Baltimore drafted in the 5th round who they had put on their practice squad. Who, by the way, I've actually been on an airplane with before. I'm pretty sure it's the same kid. When we flew to Vegas this summer, there's a kid on our flight that had I was like, that's the backpack they gave out at the Combine. Was able to look it up and we were flying out of BWI. Sure enough, Kai Blue Kelly, who was from Las Vegas, was just going home. He was on our flight. There you go. I'll tell the jury duty story before real things. The conversation with Tuss was super interesting to me, Anthony, because doing a little bit more reading as well as the day has gone on, as the show has gone on. I don't think this thing's done. I know we've been talking about it all day like it has been done, and it probably will get done. I guess I still think there's a really good chance. You don't hold that kind of press conference if you're not fairly confident that most of the major stakeholders are good. But, they are going to fight tooth and nail in Alexandria against this. I do think that there's going to be major backlash within D.C. as well. People are really upset. I'm talking people who have run for office, who are in office, luminaries and key business stakeholders like Jose Andres. Jose Andres was talking earlier today about I opened Haleo in 1993, and a couple years later there came the MCI Center, and please don't take away the arena. I still think there could be a great opportunity for DC without that arena there. No matter what, arena or not, Caps and Wizards or not, because obviously Ted wants to keep the arena there and just do other stuff, concerts, whatever. It's imperative that DC reimagines the area. It's imperative that they do something different. It can't be a dead business district. It's got to be a place that people live, work, or play, or some combination of 2 of the 3. And I don't think work is feasible anymore. I just don't think with the way that companies are operating now, commercial real estate, it's just not worth it. Remote work is saving companies money because, and it's saving, it's better for families. It's better for individuals. I actually wound up doing the show from my home studio today. That was a pure timing thing, the way some of our taping was. And then there actually was traffic, and I was like, I'm not going to make it on time. I guess I'm staying home. Typically I lose 45 minutes a day commuting. And I live very convenient to my office. There's people that lose 3 hours a day commuting when they could be being productive for their job or doing things in their life that allow them to be more productive for their job elsewhere. It's not like businesses are failing. Corporations all over the place are making record profits. It's fine. We're in 2023. We don't have to work like we did in the 1970s. Are there things that are lost? Sure. Office culture, and some of which was good and some of which is terrible. Some of it's good. Go talk to a female professional and ask how psyched they are. Who worked at a big spot. Ask them how psyched they are to not have to go to work and be harassed by the terrible men in their office. Just reality. And so I think at the end of the day, you take what is a dead business district through nobody's fault. turn it into a place where people live, hopefully in affordable housing, not in more luxury condos. We got enough of those in DC. And it's a great opportunity for the city to like get their stuff in order and do better. So we'll see. But I do think from the team side of it, from the Wizards and from the fan side of it, I'm extremely sad because, and frankly angry that Ted, who is trying to take his company public, had enough money, is trying to buy the Nationals, had enough money to buy out NBC Sports Washington, and is in business with the Qataris now, and is like taking sovereign wealth fund money, which is his prerogative, is then like, I'm leaving because the city that is having all kinds of budget constraints and Metro's about to get dilapidated and our education system needs an overhaul. They won't give me, billionaire, $600 million. I'm going to Virginia. Wah. Wah. Lose me with that. I'll tell my jury duty story and we'll get out of here with real things next. Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Wrapping up on what has been a crazy day. All of our interviews are available on demand. Hoffman Show podcast. I think they're all up on my YouTube page. I might have to publish one of them, actually. But Adam Tuss, NBC4 on the transportation side and why that could sink this entire project that Ted Leonsis has embarked on. The framework for an agreement is the official terminology right now. So we will obviously continue to follow this, and we'll talk to Jim Van Stone either tomorrow. I also proposed Friday, Anthony. We're going to be at Capital One Arena on Friday. So we were supposed to talk to Jim at 4:30, and we couldn't do that because our phones took a dive. But that's okay. The COO of Monumental Sports will join us either tomorrow or in person at Capital One on Friday. So we'll figure out those logistics and obviously keep everybody in the loop on social media on that. But our chat with Clinton Yates, our chat with one of the world's leading economists, Andy Zabalis, on all things sports and media. Sports and economics and all the different economic angles of this. That's coming up tonight, is available, I should say, now on demand on YouTube, on our podcast feed, in the Rewind and the Odyssey app. So it's all of those places. Okay, so story time. I had jury duty yesterday. And Anthony, that S was stressful.
Caught yourself.
I was trying to think. I was like, I'm just going to say it this way. I wasn't going to cuss. Don't worry. I don't know why I was so nervous. My nervous system was on the fritz the whole time. And it got to the point that it was warranted. But I did not want to sit on a jury. It's just something that from a timing perspective and really a responsibility perspective, I don't want to deal with. It's something that I got so nervous and was such a mess about it, like during, and I was texting Rachel, my wife, during, and she's like, I think you should probably like try to unpack why this was so disconcerting for you, because this is not a normal stress response to this kind of thing. Like, you're going to have to sit on a jury. It's fine. And if you miss a couple of days of work, like, it's unfortunate. I know you're busy, and this is little did I know how bad it would have been to miss today. A historic day in DC sports, but like, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything. You're a citizen, and this is what you got to do. But as the day went, so basically what happens is you show up at the court, you check in, and you go to what they call the juror lounge, which is a gigantic room. Eventually, so that was like at 8 o'clock. By the time I get in the juror lounge, I've been waiting in line for an hour. It's 9 o'clock. I actually was reading Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, the Nike founder. I've never read that book. I've always heard it's amazing. And I was like, you know what? Let's grab this. I got like halfway through. Can confirm. Book's amazing. But in the first group that they call, they call a panel of about 60 people. And then from there, you go into a courtroom. And I was the fourth person in that selected. So when we walk down into the courtroom and then have to go through the process, like the vetting process for that particular case, I'm sitting in like one of the juror chairs. And I'm like, I don't know if this means that like they've got to pass on me and replace me, or are they going to interview all of us and then decide, and this just happens to be where I sit? I don't know. We'll see. And so they're called voir dire questions. And I was like, yes, I have been a victim of a crime. My bike has been stolen twice. Yes, I do have close family that are lawyers. And then no to a bunch of other questions. And then they send us on lunch. I was like, okay, come back. Get back at 2 o'clock. Wait it's supposed to be like 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock passes. Still nothing. About 3:10, the judge is like, turns off they had like this white noise that they play in the room. So like you couldn't hear other people answering those questions. And then like when you went up, they gave you a pair of headphones and you spoke into a microphone and yada, yada. And turns off the white noise and is like, okay, now we're going to like decide basically. And he dismissed, they had only gotten through like 45, 48 of the people. And so like numbers 48 through 64 just sat there all day, never got interviewed, and left. And I was like, well, damn. I knew that being number 4 sucked. And by the way, right when they answered the questions, numbers 1 through 3, all the people to my right got dismissed. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm still under consideration. And they might have had like hardships where they, child care or whatever, like this is a bad time, and then they have to go up and sign up for another day. So they might have their day another day. But sure enough, go through the process, and now all of a sudden they've replaced the people to my right, and with jurors like 16 through 19, and they start calling people, and I'm like, oh, this is it. And jurors 16 through 19 to my right, or whatever numbers they were, dismiss. They skip over me. Everyone to my left gets sent. So I'm the only person remaining on the first row of the initial people. And I'm like, oh, no. I'm about to get selected. And they keep going, and they keep going. And at this point, I've texted Rachel. I'm like, oh, no. Like, I didn't say, oh, no. You can figure out what I said. I was like, oh, you know what? Like, I've been selected. Like, I'm going to have to sit on this jury. Like, I'm going to be off of work the next couple of days. I'm not going to be back until Monday. This is terrible. Like, I can't believe this is happening. And then they circle back and pull 2 more people out of the gallery and pull me and one other person back out. And they send me to the audience, and my whole body relaxed. I was stressed. And again, I don't know why. Jury duty is important. Civic responsibility. I didn't want to do it involuntarily. And I got out of there so fast when they dismissed us. I was like, oh, okay. But the stress of just sitting there, basically getting skipped over, like, oh, I definitely just got picked. And then the relief of like, just kidding. I don't know why they skipped over me. I don't know why they did in that order. But Anthony, I hated it until the end.
Yeah, I think I would have panicked a little bit too. I'm not gonna lie. Looking around, the room is slowly but steadily, emptying out. Everyone on my row is gone. I would have just charged to the game. Well, that's me. And then
I was ready. That was the thing. Like, I was like, all right, I have to embrace this to get myself to like calm down. I have to be like, you know what? I'm going to be on a jury. It's okay. Yep. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
This is what it is. Like, you didn't do anything wrong. And I accepted it. I was bummed, but I accepted it. And then they're like, now that you accepted it, get on out of here, bucko.
That's all it took, man.
And then I was gone. Do we have time for real things?
We got a little time.
Out of show. Okay, here we go. Quick real things today.
Real things.
We're not gonna suck this year.
Real people.
5 and 11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
The culture is actually damn good.
All right, Anthony, I don't have any list in front of me, so you tell me what you want to play and play it.
Okay.
We have Yusuf Nurkic on Draymond?
Yeah, I can do that one.
Okay, so Yusuf Nurkic got punched in the face by Draymond Green last night. This is what he said afterwards.
I was behind the play. I don't think what's going on with him. I don't know. Personally, I feel like that brother needed help. I'm glad he not trying to choke me, but at the same time, it had nothing to do with basketball, man. Like, I'm just out there trying to play basketball, they're swinging. I think we saw that often, but hope he, whatever he got in his life, will get better. So
it's pretty, actually, kind of classy by Yusuf Nurkic. And Draymond did apologize. He's like, I won't apologize for things I meant to do. I didn't mean to hit him. But that's the problem for Draymond. Is like Draymond needs to care more whether he hits people.
Yeah.
Whether it's intentional or not. And this one looked way more intentional than a lot of the other ones that I've defended him on. But you've got to be in more control. We'll do a bunch of stuff tomorrow. Thanks for listening to the Hoffman Show. Wizards basketball is next.